Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we have another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is our 110th deck and it's titled I Have 7 Mana. Cool, I win! And if you haven't seen this show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So of course, as always, before we get into the actual deck tech, I do want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel. You can find us over on Twitter at 13POYNZ, Reddit u/POYNZ13. You can send us an email, dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. Those are all great ways to reach out if you ever have any questions, you just want to chat. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody on those channels. But if you're looking to directly support everything that we're doing here, you can also support us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, where you can join the amazing people listed below, like William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Calvin Schmidt, Eric Way, Jeff Winger, and Jeffrey Bose. To the 6 of you all, thank you so much. And if you would like your name to be considered among those 6 amazing people, you can also head on over to Patreon. Once you're there, you'll get access to things like the deck lists an entire week early. You'll be able to get into a Discord where we actually brew up a lot of the decks for this channel and also play the games. So if you wanted to be in some of the games on this channel, that is always the first place I look. Plus, you get access to things like the unedited gameplay videos, so you can actually see all of the players talking and chatting and having a good time, rather than the shortened narrated version that I do. You can also get a random card sent to you every month as a thank you for all of your support. It will be one of the random cards featured for the channel as well. And last but not least, what I think is the most important part of joining the Patreon is that I will guarantee that any of your cards that you suggest will be turned into decks for this channel at some point. I will do my best to get to everyone who suggests a card, but sometimes there's just too many suggestions. I can't quite get to them all. But for our patrons, there is no limit. I will hit every single card that you talk about. It might take me a little bit, but I promise I will get there. And I can't promise that to anyone but our patrons, but I will do my best to get to all of the suggested cards that come in. So if you have suggestions, please do put them in the comments down below. Send them to me on Twitter, Reddit, email, anywhere you want. I will do my best to get to them, and I will let you know if I can't. But I think with all of that out of the way, let's get into the actual deck tech. So first up, we got to talk about our random card of the week. And this is one of our suggested cards. Came from An Magic Card over on Twitter, and they suggested that we play Firemind's Foresight. So Firemind's Foresight is 5 blue, red for an instant. That says search your library for an instant card with converted mana cost 3, reveal it, put it into your hand, then repeat this process for instant cards with converted mana costs 2 and 1, then shuffle your library. So essentially this is 7 mana. We get to search our deck for something that costs 3, 2, and 1, as long as they're instants, and put them all into our hand. Now, I've personally never played with this card. I've also never played against anybody who's actually cast this card, so I wasn't quite sure how we could use this to the best of our abilities, and eventually I was able to come up with a couple of unique things to do, one of which we will talk more about when we get to the key cards section of this deck tech. But first, we of course also have to introduce our commander, because it makes sense to talk about what we're doing, and I figured we'd stay in the Is It colors this week and use a commander that I again really haven't seen anybody play, and that is Vadrik, Astral Archmage. So Vadrik is 1 blue and a red for a 1/2 legendary creature human wizard. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as Vadrik Astral Archmage enters the battlefield. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost X less to cast, where X is Vadrik's power. And finally, whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, put a +1/+1 counter on Vadrik. So right away, Vadrik immediately gives us a -1 cost to all of our instants and sorceries because he comes in at 1 power. And that can really only grow as the game goes on. And the reason that I wanted to use Vadrik in this case is because if we're looking at Firemind's Foresight, and also, I want to be very clear, I may mess up at some point and say Firemind's Finesse, because that is a magic weapon in the D&D campaign that I'm running, so I might mistake that at some point. If I do, I apologize. Get that out of the way right away. So Firemind's Foresight If for some reason we are casting Firemind's Foresight without Vadrik, it is 7 mana, but if we are casting it with Vadrik, even if he has no counters, it's 6 mana. And because it is 5 generic mana and then a blue and a red, if we can get Vadrik's power to 5, we can actually cast Firemind's Foresight for only 2 mana, which becomes incredibly powerful considering there's a lot of instants in this deck that we can search out with it. So if that is our game plan, then of course we've got to lean into some of the themes that game plan supports. And the first of which, you may have already been able to guess, are instants and sorceries. So to that end, we have something like Solve the Equation, which is 2 and a blue for a sorcery that says search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Now, normally I don't like to play a ton of tutors in my decks, especially because they're a little bit more expensive. Solve the Equation here being a great example at $2.52. But in the long run, almost all of the tutors that are in this deck are designed to get Firemind's Foresight so that Firemind's Foresight can actually tutor out a win condition for us, which I know is a little bit convoluted because we could use Solve the Equation to get some of our combo pieces. But if we can use this to get Firemind's Foresight instead, then we're actually going to be able to get all of our combo pieces at once. And obviously, this isn't in here just to get Firemind's Foresight because there's a good chance that maybe we have it in hand or we're in a situation where we need something else. So it can get a bunch of our other instants and sorceries to make sure that whatever we need at whatever time isn't going to be affecting whatever else is going on in the game. We can get the perfect thing for the perfect situation because we pretty much have a card that helps us in every situation. So that is theme number 1 for instants and sorceries. The second part of this is a bit unique because we are focusing on cards with buyback. Buyback is a very unique effect where you can pay a certain amount of mana. In terms of capsize here, it's 3 mana, and if we pay that as we're casting the spell, we get to return the spell to our hand. So capsize, for example, is 1 blue for an instant that says return target permanent to its owner's hand, but if we pay 1 blue plus 3, we get to return target permanent to its owner's hand and also put capsize back into our hand as it resolves. The unique interaction with this and Vadrik is that the way that buyback is worded is that we can pay an additional 3 when you play this spell. Vadrik makes all of our spells cost less mana, and that does include buyback. So if we cast capsize and Vadrik has 4 power, we can pay blue and simply just return capsize to our hand for free because Vadrik covers the buyback cost. So this is an incredibly unique situation where our commander can make essentially what is a 6 mana spell cost only 2 mana and put it back into our hand. So we have a ton of buyback spells in this deck, capsize probably being the most either famous or infamous, I suppose, depending on how you look at it, because it's going to make sure that whatever we're doing, we can bounce anything that's getting in our way. Because it doesn't say target non-land permanent. We can hit enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers, battles now, and even lands. So capsize is incredibly powerful, as are all of the buyback spells when buyback is essentially free. So that's why I wanted to lean heavily into that effect for this deck. And then finally, we do need a way to win that's just beyond our instants and sorceries, so of course we have things like Gutter Snipe, which is 2 and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Shaman. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. So by having something like Gutter Snipe, or the dozens of other effects, I say dozens, that's probably an exaggeration, we have a lot, but having any number of those effects in play means that all we've got to do is just keep casting spells, and if we have something with buyback, we can cast it, return it back to our hand, cast it again, return it back to our hand, and all of a sudden, we cast one spell 3, 4, 5 times in a turn, and we could do 10 damage to each opponent every single turn. So Gutter Snipe plus all of his friends are incredibly important to us actually winning the game, because they're going to give us the damage we need while still just kind of sitting back and controlling the board by bouncing our opponent's permanents, by maybe countering our opponent's spells or interacting with what they're doing, and we're also doing damage at the same time. So that is the main way that we are going to be winning, but it's not the only way that we're going to be winning, because as we get into our key cards section of this deck tech, I really fought to find a way for Firemind's Foresight to just win us the game, to find 3 cards, a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and a 3-drop, that we would be able to cast to just straight up win the game. And the only combination I was able to come up with, which, by the way, if there are others, please let me know. I would love to hear them. This combination does involve a reserve list card, so I'm not going to lie to you, this is a very expensive part of our deck. But the 3 cards we want to get with Firemind's Foresight are Lightning Bolt, Reset, and Reiterate. If we get these 3 cards, they create an infinite loop that wins us the game. And the way that that's going to work is we are going to cast Reset on our opponent's turn, specifically after their upkeep, and it's going to untap all of our lands. With that on the stack, we are going to cast Reiterate with buyback to make sure that we put it back into our hand, and we are going to copy the Reset. That's going to untap all of our lands, but now we still have the original Reset on the stack. So, in response to the original Reset, we tap all of our lands, float all of our mana, and cast Reiterate again with buyback, being able to create an infinite loop where we are making an infinite amount of mana. It is important that we have the mana to cast this, so if we have Vadrik on board and maybe his power is 4, we only need at least 4 mana to do it. You would need 5 to create infinite mana, but at least 4 to get the loop going. And if we don't have Vadrik on board, then we need 8 mana to be able to just start the loop and 9 mana to go infinite. So Vadrik is a very important combo piece, but he is not essential to what is happening if you have the mana to do it. So once we've generated infinite mana with Reset and Reiterate, we can now let the original Reset resolve, or if you don't want to take that risk, cast Lightning Bolt in response, and then just continue the loop with Reiterate. So you'd cast Reiterate to copy Lightning Bolt, put it back into your hand, cast Reiterate again, make another Lightning Bolt, and that's going to do an infinite amount of damage to each of our opponents. So infinite mana, infinite damage, and we win the game. Essentially, if we can get to 7 mana and cast Firemind's Foresight, we can just win the game on our next turn because there's a very good chance that with something like Vadrik, we're able to go off a lot sooner than anticipated, and we don't actually need the 9 mana that it looks like we need to make this trick work. So that is the real synergy of the deck. That's what we want to do with Firemind's Foresight. But there is a chance that we also just win with Gutter Snipe effects, or maybe even just beating down with Vadrik if he gets big enough. So that is our key card section. I know I cheated a little bit. Normally we actually talk about 3 specific cards, but I feel like this constitutes a good key card section. So moving on to our next portion of the deck tech, we got to talk about some cool interactions. These are the cards that synergize either very well together, kind of help push us toward a victory, might just be good value combinations, or sometimes are just cards that I really want to highlight because I think they work in super cool ways. So the first of which, if you've seen any of my videos before, and you know that I've played a lot of red in the past, this is a combination that shows up, I don't want to say in literally every red deck I play, but it's pretty much every red deck I play, because that is Dualcaster Mage and Twin Flame. Now I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of this combo, but personally I like having backup win conditions in all of my decks, and it's nice to be able to just end the game sometimes because it might be going long, you've been playing for 2+ hours, and there's no real way for people to win, so sometimes it's nice to have just a 2-card win the game combo in the deck. Obviously, if you're playing against people you don't know, it is always nice to mention this up front, which is why I wanted to talk about it in cool interactions. But essentially, to break this down, we have Dualcaster Mage, which is 1 red for a 2/2 human wizard. It's got flash, and when Dualcaster Mage enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. We're going to combine that up with Twin Flame, which is 1 and a red for a sorcery. It has Strive. The spell costs 2 and a red more to cast for each target beyond the first. We're almost never going to cast it for Strive in this situation, because the most important part of Twin Flame is that you can choose any number of target creatures you control. For each of them, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it has haste. Exile those tokens at the beginning of the next end step. So essentially, the way that this works is if we have any creature on board, we cast Twin Flame, targeting whatever creature it is, Vadrik or something else. Then with the Twin Flame still on the stack, we cast Dualcaster Mage to copy the Twin Flame, choosing new targets, which is now the Dualcaster Mage that's in play. So we make a token copy of Dualcaster Mage. That token copy also makes a copy of the original Twin Flame, which then copies Dualcaster Mage, and you can kind of see where this is going. We make infinite Dualcaster Mages, all of which have haste, and then we just swing into our opponents and win. Now, obviously, this isn't a perfect combo because if someone has, say, a fog, we do just lose to that. But like I said, it's a nice way to make sure that you can end the game if you need to, or if for some reason our main win conditions like our Gutter Snipes or our Reset Lightning Bolt combo gets taken out of the game somehow, this is at least a backup. So if you don't like winning this way, then I would recommend taking it out, but at least tell your opponents if you want to have a fair game. But that is only cool interaction number 1. We still got one more to talk about, and this one's a little bit spicier, at least in my opinion, even though there's less red involved, and that is going to be between Wizards of Thay and Ingenious Mastery. So Wizards of Thay is like a mini Vadrik. It is 3 and a blue for a 3/3 human wizard. It has Myriad. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and you may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. So all we've got to do is have Wizards of Thay in play, and all of our stuff costs 1 less to cast, and we can cast sorceries at instant speed. Luckily for us, Ingenious Mastery is a sorcery for X 2 and a blue, and you may pay 2 and a blue rather than pay this spell's mana cost. If the 2 and a blue cost was paid, you draw 3 cards, then an opponent creates 2 treasure tokens and they scry 2. We almost never want to do that, that's a pretty bad deal for us. But if that cost wasn't paid, you draw X cards. So it's essentially 4 mana, draw 1 card. Now, that doesn't seem super great, but one of the nice interactions between things like Wizards of Thay, which makes instants and sorceries cost 1 less, and any X spell, is that the X is part of the cost, so it can cost less. So if we have 2 and a blue and Wizards of Thay, that 2 and a blue essentially equals 4 mana. And the reason I wanted to combine these 2 cards in particular is because of the Myriad ability on Wizards of Thay. If they attack, then we get a copy attacking each other opponent. If that's a 4-player game, we get 3 Wizards of Thay. All of them say our instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast, so now they all cost 3 less to cast, and we can cast sorcery spells as though they had flash, letting us play Ingenious Mastery during our combat, letting us take advantage of the Myriad tokens and be able to pay 2 and a blue and draw 3 cards without having to spend the actual student cost on the Ingenious Mastery. So same exact mana cost, we draw the same amount of cards, but our opponents don't get to make the 2 treasure tokens and scry 2. And that's obviously just the baseline. We can also maybe have something like Vadrik in play to make the X cost even more, or maybe we have extra mana to sink into it. But that is a great example of 2 cards that are very powerful on their own, but work even better together, which obviously makes them perfect to highlight in our cool interactions. So that is the vast majority of our deck tech, but I know the last thing we got to get to is the price of the deck, since this is a budget show and we have already highlighted a card that is $30+. You're probably thinking this is a pretty expensive deck. Now, you're both right and wrong, because this week the deck came out to $84.25, which means that if you cut Reset, you're looking at a deck that's about $50, which is pretty good if you're looking for just a generic Is It Spellslinger deck without the infinite combo that can be tutored out. And there are ways to make the infinite combo work without Reset. Unfortunately, Reset is the only 2 mana instant that does this in the Is It colors. But you could also use something like Dramatic Reversal to untap artifacts you control. So if you had enough mana rocks to generate the mana you needed, you could replace Reset and trim the price of the deck down quite a bit. However, if you are looking to keep the infinite combo because it is incredibly powerful, and you're looking for the second most expensive card in the deck, That one is going to be Merchant Scroll. And Merchant Scroll is 1 in a blue for a sorcery. Search your library for a blue instant card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. That is almost a $5 card. Again, we're not super close to the budget. We're at $84, so we're about $16 less than where we need to be. But if you cut Merchant Scroll, you're looking at trimming down to about $80, which 80% of our total budget, not too bad. So if that's something you're interested in and you don't want to cut the main combo piece, you can cut this tutor, which is good and it can get us Firemind's Foresight, but it doesn't directly win us the game. So that would be my recommendation for this deck. However, if you are looking for a card to add to the deck, to maybe increase the price of the deck, that I would put in here and probably should put in here, but it doesn't quite fit the budget restraints, I would recommend the most recent mono red Praetor in Urabrask. So Urabrask, 2 red for a legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor, 4/4, first strike. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Urabrask deals 1 damage to target opponent, add 1 red. So already we have a bunch of these effects, so this is a perfect fit for us. But Urabrask also has the ability to pay 1 red and exile Urabrask, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, activate only as a sorcery, and only if you've cast 3 or more instant and or sorcery spells this turn. We're going to be casting a ton of instant and sorceries, so we'll probably just get some free value because once it transforms, it becomes the Great Work. And the Great Work, starting at step 1, deals 3 damage to target opponent and each creature they control, so that could be a mini board wipe if we need it. Step 2, we create 3 treasure tokens. That's great, that's ramping us. And finally, until the end of turn, you may cast instant and sorcery spells from any graveyard. If a spell cast this way would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead, then exile the Great Work and return it to the battlefield front face up, so we would get Urabrask back. Now, we have ways of getting our instants and sorceries out of the graveyard in this deck already, but having an ability to cast any spell from any graveyard is incredibly powerful, because that means that not only are we getting our spells, but we could maybe steal someone's Cultivate, we could steal someone's card draw or removal if we needed it, and we have the treasures that we made the previous turn to generate mana that we can't make otherwise. So the Great Work and Urabrask are incredibly powerful and a great fit for this deck, but they are $18, which is over our budget limit. Admittedly, not too much. You could probably cut Merchant Scroll and throw in Urabrask and it would still be under the $100, but for the sake of this deck, I wasn't quite able to squeeze it in. And if you're looking for a card to replace, I would recommend Hypersonic Dragon, because Hypersonic Dragon is 3 blue-red for a 4/4 dragon, flying in haste. You may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. Now, when I first put this card in here, I was thinking we had a lot more sorceries than we actually do, and in reality, there's only 11 sorceries in the entire deck, which is only slightly more than 10% of our entire deck, so I don't necessarily know that Hypersonic Dragon is necessary or even that good. I think it's a nice upside, but we don't really want to be spending 5 mana for a 4/4 dragon when we could be holding up our mana to cast one of our many instants instead. So I don't think Hypersonic Dragon is a great fit for this deck, but I also don't think it's necessarily terrible if you do need to keep it in, obviously for budget purposes. So that brings us to the end of our deck tech, and obviously we've been doing a ton of talking about how this deck functions, but the best thing we can do for it is to see how it performs in a game. So we are going to run this deck up against 3 opponents this week and find out if we're able to combo with Firemind's Foresight, or maybe if there's something else going on with the deck. So this week, we are being joined by Giraffanat playing Nemada Primeval Warden, Tim from Your Dead Next Turn playing Jorn, God of Winter, and Grubble playing Khazar Ruthless Stalker and Ukima Stalking Shadow. So starting out with Nat's Nemada deck, this is a Saproling deck, and she's focused pretty heavily on sacrificing her Saprolings and spore counters and generating value from just kind of regrowing her board state, I suppose. So Nemada, I've never seen this commander in action. I'm very interested to see how it goes because I was also very interested in building this commander when it was first spoiled, and I never quite got around to it. So I would love to see what she did with the deck, and I love Saprolings, so I'm here for that one. next up, we have Tim from Your Dead Next Turn, which if you didn't see this game already, spoilers, it was actually played on Tim's channel where we recorded this and we streamed it. So if you're interested in that, do check him out. I'll put the link to his channel down below so you can go and check that out. But Tim is playing Jorn, God of Winter, which is a snow deck. And I know from the front side of Jorn, it looks like it's a mono green deck, but it is in fact a Sultai, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. For some reason, I'm doubting myself at this moment, but I'm pretty sure it's Sultai. In Cauldring the Rime Staff on the backside, which is a legendary snow permanent, and you may play target snow permanent card from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield tapped. I can't imagine he's going to be playing the backside too often because he wants to be able to keep untapping his permanents with the Jorn side of it and make sure that he can keep generating value. But I don't see a ton of snow decks, so I'm very interested to see what he does with this one. I don't really know what to expect from it because, like I said, I don't play against a ton of snow decks, so I'm not quite sure what to be worried about. The only thing that does concern me is, of course, the blue in here being able to counter, like our Firemind's Foresight, would not be great, so I am keeping an eye on that. And then finally, we have Grubble playing Ukima and Khazur. From what he mentioned, Khazur is not an integral part to this deck. He's probably going to be chilling in the command zone the whole time. The real threat here is Ukima, because Ukima is unblockable, which adds to a little bit of a Voltron style strategy. So Grubble wants to kind of suit Ukima up with a ton of stuff, make it super big, and then smack people. And then it also has the added benefit of doing damage to target player equal to its power when it leaves the battlefield. So he could hit someone for, say, 20, and then flicker it, and then do 20 more damage as it leaves the battlefield. So this is the deck that I am probably the most concerned about, especially because I have lost to Khazur and Ukima quite a few times in the past. Ukima is incredibly powerful and almost sneakily strong. You don't really expect it to be that good, and then all of a sudden there's a 15-15 just hitting you that's unblockable, and then, you know, it's flickered and does 15 more and you're out of the game. So I think this is my pick for the most dangerous deck at the table. So we'll see how this goes, but I hope you all are excited for the game. I know I am, and if you want to see the game in its entirety, you can always go over to Tim's channel, which, like I said earlier, will be linked in the description. But I say let's get this thing underway, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Giraffanat goes first, followed by Tim, Grubble, and then myself. On Nat's first turn, she plays a forest. Tim plays a forest. Grubble plays an underground river. I play a Temple of Epiphany, scrying 1. Nat plays a swamp, then cast Vitaspore Thalid, getting a spore counter in her upkeep, being able to remove 3 counters to create a Saproling, and being able to sacrifice a Saproling to give a creature haste until the end of turn. Tim plays a forest. Grubble plays Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, turning all lands into forests in addition to their other types. On my turn, I play an island, then cast a Felwar Stone, and follow that up by casting Wizard Class, gaining no maximum hand size. In Nat's upkeep, she puts a Spore counter on her Thalid, then casts Underseller Myconid, creating a 1/1 Saproling token when it enters or leaves the battlefield, then attacks me for 1. Tim plays another forest and casts his commander Jorn, God of Winter, letting him untap all of his snow permanents whenever he attacks. Grubble plays a Tide Channel Pathway, then casts a Rhystic Study, drawing a card whenever one of his opponents casts a spell, unless that opponent pays 1 mana. I play a Myriad Landscape, then cast my commander Vadrik, Astral Archmage, making it day, putting a +1/+1 counter on him whenever it switches between day and night, and also making all my instants and sorceries cost X less to cast, where X is his power, but I don't pay for the Rhystic Study, letting Grubble draw a card. In Nat's upkeep, she puts a Spore counter on her Thalid, plays a Phyrexian Tower, and casts Spore Sower Thalid, putting a Spore counter on all Thalids she controls in her upkeep, also letting her remove 3 counters to create a Saproling, and she also doesn't pay for Rhystic Study. Tim plays a Forest and casts Blessing of Frost, putting 4 +1/+1 counters on Jorn, drawing a card, also not paying for Rhystic Study. He then moves to combat and attacks Grubble for 7 with Jorn, and on attacks, untaps all of his snow permanents. This allows him in his second main phase to foretell a card, and then pass. Grubble plays an island and casts his commander Ukima Stalking Shadow, which is unblockable and does X damage to target player, gaining Grubble X life when it leaves the battlefield, where X is its power. On my turn, I sacrifice Myriad Landscape to search my library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped, and also play an Is It Boilerworks, returning an island to my hand. In Nat's upkeep, she puts Spore counters on all of her Thalids, and since I cast no spells on my turn, it becomes Night, putting a +1/+1 counter on Vadrik. Then Nat uses Phyrexian Tower to sacrifice a Saproling and cast her commander Nemata Primeval Warden, exiling any creature that dies, letting her create a Saproling token. She also removes 3 Spore counters from Vitaspore to create a Saproling, and casts Rampant Growth, searching her library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. In Tim's upkeep, it becomes Day, since Nat casts 2 spells on her turn, putting another counter on Vadrik. Then Tim plays a Forest and attacks Grubble for 7 with Jorn, untapping all his snow permanents. Before damage though, Grubble casts Vapor Snag, returning Jorn to Tim's hand, losing him a life and preventing the damage. In Tim's second main phase though, he simply recasts his commander and then passes. On Grubble's turn, he plays a Swamp and casts Toski, Bearer of Secrets, letting him draw a card whenever a creature he controls deals combat damage to a player, which he immediately does, attacking Tim for 2 with Ukima. On my turn, I play an island and cast Firmament Sage, letting me draw a card whenever it switches between day and night, and also cast Merchant Scroll, searching my library for a blue instant, which in this case is Firemind's Foresight, putting it into my hand. In Nat's upkeep, she puts Spore counters on all of her Thalids, then casts Arcane Signet, followed up by casting Thelon of Havenwood, giving all fungus creatures +1/+1 for each Spore counter on them. On Tim's turn, he plays a Forest and moves straight to combat, attacking Grubble for 3, untapping all of his snow permanents, but Grubble blocks with his indestructible Toski, taking no damage. In Grubble's upkeep, it becomes Night since Tim cast no spells on his turn, putting a counter on Vadrik and drawing me a card. Then Grubble plays a Forest and casts Raised by Giants, giving his commander's base power and toughness 10/10. This allows him to move to combat and attack Tim for 10 with Ukima and Nat for 1 with Toski, drawing 2 total cards. At the end of turn, I cast a Salundi Vision, looking at the top 6 cards of my library, revealing an instant or sorcery from among them and putting it into my hand. The only hit though is a Slip Out the Back, so that goes into my hand. Then on my turn, I play a Desolate Lighthouse and cast Pyromancer's Goggles, which can tap for a red mana and copy any red instant or sorcery cast with the mana that it produces. In Nat's upkeep, she puts Spore counters on all of her Thalids, then casts a Bastion of Remembrance, creating a 1/1 human token when it enters, and makes each of her opponents lose a life while she gains a life whenever any of her creatures die. She then removes 3 Spore counters from her Spore Sower, making another Saproling token. Tim casts a Replicating Ring, and moves to combat, attacking Grubble for 3 with Jorn, untapping his snow permanents. This then allows him in his second main phase to cast his first non-green spell, Hailstorm Valkyrie. In Grubble's upkeep, it becomes Day, since Tim cast 2 spells on his turn, putting a +1/+1 counter on Vadrik and drawing me a card. Then Grubble plays a Yavimaya Coast and moves to combat, attacking Tim for 10 with Ukima, knocking him out with lethal commander damage. And at the same time, also attacks me for 1 with Toski, which I block, taking no damage while Grubble draws a card. At the end of turn, I cast Firemind's Foresight using the Pyromancer's Goggles, copying it. This means I get to search my library for 2 instants that cost 1 mana, 2 instants that cost 2 mana, and 2 instants that cost 3 mana, putting them all into my hand. In the end, I wind up getting Lightning Bolt, Pull from Tomorrow, Reiterate, Searing Touch, Negate, and Capsize. Once that resolves though, Grubble overloads Cyclonic Rift, returning all non-land permanents his opponents control to their owner's hands. In response to that, Nat casts a Golgari Charm, destroying Grubbles raised by giants. She also sacrifices 4 Saprolings to make each of her opponents lose 4 life, while she gains 4 life. Still in response, I also cast Searing Touch, doing 1 damage to Nat and being able to buy it back for free thanks to Vadrik, casting it again to do 1 more damage to Nat. Then the board wipe resolves, returning all non-land permanents that Nat and I control to our hands. On my turn, I play a Riptide Laboratory and recast Wizard class, gaining no maximum hand size, and also recast my commander Vadrik. On Nat's turn, she recasts the Vitaspore Thallid, and also casts Slimefoot the Stowaway, making each of her opponents lose a life while she gains a life whenever a Saproling she controls dies. Grubble plays a Swamp and casts Fire Shrieker, immediately equipping it to Ukima, giving it Double Strike. He then moves to combat and attacks me for 4 with Ukima and 1 with Toski, drawing 2 cards. At the end of turn, I cast Consider, surveilling 1 and drawing a card. Then on my turn, I play a Mountain and pass. In Nat's upkeep, it becomes nighttime since I cast no spells on my turn, putting a counter on Vadrik, while she also puts a Spore counter on her Thallid. Then Nat plays a Forest and recasts Undercellar Myconid, making another Saproling token. Grubble casts a Hand of Vecna, equipping it to Ukima and moving to combat, giving it +8/+8 until the end of turn, since Grubble has 8 cards in hand. He then attacks me for 20 with Ukima and 1 with Toski. Before the damage though, I cast Slip Out the Back to phase Ukima out and put a +1/+1 counter on it. Unfortunately, Grubble has an answer, casting Swan Song to counter my spell and give me a 2/2 bird token. Still trying to save myself though, I cast Reiterate with Buyback to copy my own Slip Out the Back, once again targeting Ukima and then returning Reiterate to my hand. Grubble though still has a response, casting Simic Charm to return Ukima to his hand, attempting to do 10 damage to me when it leaves play. I also still have a response though, countering the charm with Negate and finally putting an end to our war over Ukima, with the final result being that Ukima gets phased out with a +1/+1 counter, I make a 2/2 bird token, and then I block Toski with the bird, taking no damage. In my upkeep, it becomes day, since Grubble casts 2 spells on his turn and Vadrik gets a +1/+1 counter. Then I play an island and pass. In Nat's upkeep, it switches back to day since I cast no spells on my turn, putting a +1/+1 counter on Vadrik while Nat puts a Spore counter on her Thallid. She then recasts her commander Namada and sacrifices a Saproling to gain a life and make Grubble and I both lose a life. She also casts an Arcane Signet, and at the end of her turn, I decide to try to win the game by floating 10 mana and then cast Reset to untap all of my lands. In response to my own reset, I also cast Reiterate with Buyback to return it to my hand and copy Reset. This creates a loop where I'm able to continue casting Reiterate and continue copying Reset to untap my lands, floating 10 mana in between each cast to generate an infinite amount of mana. With that mana, I'm able to do the same loop but replace Reset with Lightning Bolt, doing an infinite amount of damage to each of my opponents, winning me the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. I am very, very impressed by how our deck performed. I really didn't know what to think about Vadrik when the game started. I didn't think we would switch between day and night quite as often as we did, and I think it was very impressive to be able to force it into nighttime on our turn because we have mostly instants anyway. and then know that by the time it got back around to us, it was probably going to swap back to daytime, so we could get multiple counters on Vadrik every single go around the table, and that just made everything we were doing incredibly powerful. Firemind's Foresight being able to be copied with the Pyromancer's Goggles and tutor up 2 of every mana value worth of spells was very, very strong, and really I just think it overperformed all of my expectations. I'm not much of an Izzet player. Honestly, I'm not much of a blue player in general. I know that the statistics videos I've done in the past might say otherwise, but that's not my go-to color. So I'm very impressed by everything that happened, and very cool to just kind of be able to win with an infinite combo, because that's not normally my thing. Going around the table, though, to talk about everyone else's decks, Giraffanat, her Nemata deck was very, very cool. I was very impressed by all the Spore counters, and Thelen coming in and just making her team an absolute set of monsters was very sweet. Giraffanat also, like Tim and Grubble, that we'll talk about later, has some ways that you can follow her, check out some of her streams, check out some of the stuff that she does. I will link that in the description of the video, so please do check her out. She is an amazing person and a ton of fun to play with. So very cool showing by Nat's deck, and hopefully I'll get to see more of Nemata in the future, because I just love that card. I think it's a lot of fun. Next, we got Tim and his Jorn deck. You might have been tricked into thinking that Tim was playing a mono green snow deck, but that was not actually the case. He did have other cards in there that were not green, so he really got unlucky in this one and didn't quite get any of his colors except for green until right at the very end, and then, you know, got taken out by a massive Ukima. So not Tim's game, unfortunately. Like I mentioned earlier, though, and with Nat, if you are interested in any of Tim's content, I will link his stuff down in the description of the video, so please do check him out. I really appreciate that he brought me onto his stream, and it was a ton of fun. Hopefully I can come back in the future. And then finally, we have Grubble and his Ukima and Khazur deck, which I rightly predicted at the beginning was an absolute powerhouse of a deck. Ukima is absolutely terrifying, even though it doesn't really look like it up front. Ukima put in a ton of work, did a ton of damage, and the turn where we had the counter war, where each of us cast 3, I think, spells to try to stop, well, in my case, stop Ukima from attacking me, or in Grubble's case, make sure that Ukima did attack me. It was lethal on board. I was dead if that Ukima hit me, so I had to make sure it was gone, and Grubble knew that, so he kept up a ton of removal and a ton of answers, but you know, we were allowed to tutor our library about 7 times that game, so it wasn't the best for him. But overall, I do think the deck was very sweet. Just like Nat and Tim, if you are interested in Grubble's content, please do check him out. I put all of his stuff in the description of the video. He's an awesome dude, so check him out, check out Tim, check out Nat. They're all amazing people, and hopefully I can be back on some of their streams in the future, or have them join us for future games as well. So I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please do like and subscribe to the channel. It does help out quite a bit. And if you have suggestions for future videos, please do put them in the comments. I would love to hear it. And last but not least, if you have any suggestions for the deck itself, if you think there's cards that I missed that should be in here, or if you know of another way to combo without reset with Firemind's Foresight, I would love to hear it, because I couldn't find anything else, but I also probably didn't look quite as hard as I should have. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.